Welcome, LA Progressive friends and family. Dick and I are again today with Bill Blum. Bill Blum is a former judge and death penalty defense attorney. He's the author of three legal thrillers published by Penguin Putnam, Prejudicial Era, The Last Appeal, and The Face of Justice. And he's a contributing writer for the LA Progressive, Truth Dig, and maybe even other publications. Welcome,
Yeah,
Bill.
thank you. Always great to be with you.
Thanks, Bill. We're publishing an article we titled Napoleon and Clownface. Trump's assaults on the rule of law are crude and sometimes clownish, but the paradigm shift driving them has been carefully planned. And in the article, you list many of the kind of egregious cuts that are going on, laying off people left and right, cutting departments, cutting back on rights. Many of it seem to be directed at LGBT people, at Black people, at brown people. But then you go at the end of the article, the last part of it is even more critical. It's the efforts to radically change the nature of our government. And you outline four different things: unitary executive theory, radical constitutionalism, common good constitutionalism, and the dark Enlightenment. And the Dark Enlightenment interests me the most because that's actually an attempt that seems to have some momentum on it to replace democracy with technocracy. Do you want to talk about those issues?
Yeah, so this is really an article on whether we have a constitutional crisis in the United States. And I think we're in one, and it's going to accelerate. And we'll see if Trump and his supporters in government try to defy court orders in an overt and direct way. If and when they do that, then you know that the Constitution has broken down, that the system of checks and balances is essentially over. And although Trump is no intellectual powerhouse, as I say in the article, there are these paradigm shifts in theories of governance that are being put into practice now. And it's not as though any one of them, except for that, the first one, the unitary executive, has actually been adopted formally now. And this has happened after I wrote the article with Executive Order number 69, which actually says that whatever the president says is the law as far as all executive branch agencies are concerned. So we've heard a lot about the unitary executive theory over the years because this has been propounded by right-wing intellectuals. And just to give some background on it, what it means is that all executive power is concentrated in the hands of the president, and the president should be free to exercise executive powers without interference from the other two branches of government. And the idea, as I read in the article, it harkens back to Nixon's statement that when the president does it, that means it's not illegal, but it even goes back much farther than that. The people who propound this theory and who are really intellectuals go all the way back to Alexander Hamilton's essay, and I didn't get into this in the article because it just would have been a treatise rather than an opinion column, his number 70, his essay number 70 in the Federalist Papers, in which he talks about how the president has to be a unitary executive and a powerful executive, because the debate during the ratification crisis in the United States was over whether or not we should have a committee or two people serving as co-presidents, or whether we should have a single president. And Hamilton arguing in favor of the position that there should be a single president because that allows that single president to have clear policies, no conflicts with a rival in the executive branch. And so people who propound this unitary executive theory go all the way back there. But Hamilton also was a great proponent of checks and balances, of judicial review. So he wasn't espousing something on the order of what you're seeing Trump claim to be today. Remember, during his first term in office, he said, under Article 2, I can do whatever I want to. And now he's doing whatever he wants to because the Republicans control both branches, I mean, all three branches of government. So the other two theories, the radical constitutionalism, that's an idea that Russell Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, has been proposing for a few years now. And it's a kind of unitary executive theory, only animated by Christian nationalism. There's the constitutional good, which is a theory propounded by a very influential Harvard law professor that a lot of people haven't heard of, Adrian Vermeule, who wants to come up with an alternative both to originalism, that's the conservative view that the meaning of the Constitution is fixed, and the progressive idea of living constitutionalism, which is that the Constitution evolves over time. And he has this idea of common good constitutionalism, but unfortunately for the rest of us, what his idea of the constitutional good is to have a very powerful ruler who rules through what he calls reasoned morality. And really, it's just another way of getting towards a kind of authoritarianism in the country, also tinged with religiosity. And then lastly, the one that you mentioned, this theory of the Dark Enlightenment. And this is kind of a futuristic sort of techno-fascism that's associated with Musk and other Silicon Valley right-wingers, which argues that society should be rebuilt not along democratic lines, but along the lines where the levers of power and institutions are controlled by these brilliant software engineers who will use the tools that are available to them to make society more efficient. And that's probably the scariest of all, because you're seeing it being implemented with Elon Musk being in charge of his Doge organization and cutting back government, allegedly to make it more efficient. But we know that what they're really doing is carving up government, sort of the way that the old Soviet state was carved up and then parceled out to oligarchs. Only this time it's being done by people like Musk, who comically disguises himself as tech support in that cabinet meeting that just occurred last week. So there are all these theories of governance which are animating what Trump is doing, and Trump's this perfect vessel for these theories of how government should work, because they all centralize power in the executive branch, and particularly in the president. And so Trump is their point person. And that's where this country appears to be headed. And the question now is, how far will it continue? How long before there's mass protests because people's economic interests are going to be undermined, not just their rights and freedoms. And I think we're seeing the beginning of that with protests at town halls, more demonstrations on the streets, and you're seeing Trump's approval ratings either stagnating or going down pretty significantly. And for a president who's still in his first 40 days in office, that's unusual, to say the least. So this is America at the crossroads. And then what happened yesterday in the meeting between Zelensky, Vance, and Trump was truly extraordinary. And I don't watch a lot of cable news anymore, but my wife had left the program on when she went out on CNN, and I just walked into a room with perfect timing, where these two guys were just erupting at Trump. And so I watched it. I watched it in real time. I was stunned by what I saw. And I think you're seeing this paradigm shift underway. And the question is, America, is this what you want? Maybe it is. It's not certainly what I want or what you want, but this is the time for people to decide whether this is the future that you want for yourself, your friends, your family, and your children.
So, to recap, we were talking about what is a constitutional crisis and the fact that there really isn't a set definition, but there is a way to look at what a constitutional crisis might be by looking at these primary areas: the unitary executive theory, the radical constitutionalism, the common good constitution, and the dark enlightenment. My question is, it appears to me that Donald Trump, who has often said that Andrew Jackson is his favorite president, he might be the kind of president that wants to do what Andrew Jackson did. And that is, he's not going to really spend any time in deep thought theorizing what kind of constitutional crisis this is. He appears to want to do what he's going to do, regardless of what the Constitution says or what precedent may have been established. Like Andrew Jackson in 1832, there was a Supreme Court case, Worcester v. Georgia, that favored the rights of Native Americans. And Andrew Jackson said, "Oh, really? The Supreme Court has made a decision favoring the rights of Native Americans. Now let them enforce it." Because we know the Supreme Court doesn't have any brute force. They can make a decision, but then it's up to another branch of government to enforce it. And so my question to you is, Donald Trump appears to have done a few things to legitimize his actions, like in his first stint as president, he had the Muslim ban, and he started by doing fear mongering, talking about how we need to be afraid of Muslims, which is kind of what he's also done with brown people that have come into the country, not all immigrants, just the immigrants that are coming from the South. What do you see Donald Trump, what direction is he taking this country into in terms of being a country that is ruled by law?
Well, what he's trying to do is to say that he is the law. Executive Order 69 basically says that, but it doesn't explicitly deny the power of the courts. What we're waiting to see is whether the Supreme Court in any meaningful way will stand up to Donald Trump. And if it does, what Trump does in response to that. Now, this is a Supreme Court, which is very conservative, which includes 3 Trump nominees, and which last term handed Trump unprecedented immunity from criminal prosecution. That does not mean that anything the president does is legal and can't be enjoined, can't be stopped by the courts. But I don't know if this court has the stomach, at least at this stage, to defy Donald Trump. It has a case in front of it on an emergency basis dealing with the cutoff of funds to the U.S. Agency for International Development, and specifically the funds that were allocated by Congress to be spent even before Trump cut the agency back, essentially destroying it. So it's a complicated case, but on the merits should result in an adverse ruling to Trump, as it did at the district court level and at the Court of Appeals. So now the Supreme Court has it, and rather than go along with the lower courts, which stop Trump from cutting off these funds, it temporarily paused those lower court rulings, essentially allowing Trump to go ahead pending a decision. All the briefing was done by yesterday, I believe, and we're waiting for a decision. It should have been a quick decision. The fact that it hasn't been handed down as of our discussion right now suggests to me that the court's divided. We don't know how it's divided. If it isn't divided, it may be divided on the merits. There may be some justices who say that Trump can rescind these contracts because they're executive branch actions. You have Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito going in that direction. You may have the three Democrats on the court going in the other opposite direction. And then you may have some of the justices saying, you know, we don't want to put our power on the line in this case. This is not the case we want. This is not the hill we want to die on. So we're going to come up with some sort of ruling which doesn't openly defy Donald Trump, but allows him to do what he wants to do. I don't know what that would be. Maybe to keep the administrative stay, the pause in effect, and say, we want to decide the case on the merits and handle it like they did the immunity case and keep it on the docket for months and months and months while things play out. But this is the first case to go to the Supreme Court that potentially would pit the court against Trump. And a lot of commentators, myself included, think that when Trump openly defies the Supreme Court, as Andrew Jackson did in the Cherokee case, whether or not that exact quote is something that Jackson ever said, his actions were consistent with this quote. And if he does that, then we know we're in a constitutional crisis. Constitutional crisis, generally everybody agrees it's a situation where the Constitution just is inadequate to decide major questions. And then you get into what kind of constitutional crisis it is, and that's really of interest to a lot of academics, but to the general public, it's a situation where the Constitution just doesn't work anymore, either because the mechanisms set up by the Constitution are antiquated, or because one principal actor, like the president, says, all right, the Constitution's clear, but it doesn't apply to me anymore. Or there's a situation where the president says the other side's violating the Constitution, which they're doing now. They're saying these judges who are overturning executive actions are the ones creating a constitutional crisis. And then constitutional scholars are saying, no, it's Trump because he's aggregating all this power to himself and undertaking actions and issuing orders that are blatantly unconstitutional, such as the rescission of birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment. So we're in a wait and see game to a certain extent, but what we're seeing every day is something new. And partly that's by design. It's called flooding the zone. You do so many things that the opposition can't keep up with everything that you're doing. And partly it's just Trump's personality. He's erratic, he's paranoid, and he lashes out at his enemies, whether they're real opponents or imaginary enemies, as though he needs those enemies in order to live and breathe. So it's a perfect storm. You've got a president who is a receptacle for these theories that other people who are much more sophisticated in a political science kind of way are implementing through him. And you just have to remember what Project 2025 was all about. We heard all about it during the election. And we heard Trump saying, I don't know what it's all about. Of course, now you have about 30 people from Project 2025 who are in the administration, and they seem to be implementing many of his programs and policies. So we're at a pretty bad point in the United States. And the question is, what are ordinary, and I don't mean in a derogatory way, what are regular Americans going to do about it? Not people who follow politics for a living, not you, not me, and people who write about it all the time, but regular people. What are you going to do about it? It's really up to them now. I think that people like you continue to do what you're doing. You put the information out there, you hope you reach people, I know you guys participate in conferences. You're very active. It's really up to ordinary people now, regular Americans. What are you going to do about it?
So we are, and I consider ourselves, we are regular Americans. And what we're trying to impart to other regular Americans is that a democracy only works if you work it. So if you look at the situation that our country is in and you throw your hands up and say, oh, I can't fix it, then you are a contributing factor to the problem. But I also want to talk a little bit about this discussion about what Andrew Jackson did and this constitutional crisis. To some people who are regular people, it may seem like, oh, this is too ethereal. There's too much theory, it's too academic. But we need to understand that when Andrew Jackson said that the Supreme Court has made its decision, now let them enforce it, what he was talking about was sending the Cherokees out of the territory and having them march on foot across the land. It was known as the Trail of Tears. And approximately 4,000 Indians died. So that's how this stuff plays out. It's not just academic. These decisions that are made at the executive level trickle down and impact our personal lives. And I'm just saying that to ordinary people that think that they don't have a hand in changing things, well, you certainly will participate in the damaging effects of these decisions.
The thing is, what I mean by regular people, and I mean it in a positive way. I mean, these are not people who spend hours on end reading political literature. They have other things to do with their lives, and they are going to be affected, and not in some abstract way. When the House budget becomes law and Medicaid is slashed and Social Security is undermined and inflation continues and the tax cuts for the super rich are extended and maybe expanded, that's going to affect everybody in an ordinary, everyday sense. And then the question is going to be, what are you going to do about it? Eventually, you're going to have, and this is already starting, the Trump administration and people who are guiding it tell you where you can travel. Today you can't go to places like Cuba or North Korea. And that's in some way understandable. You can't go to North Korea. You can just you have to have sort of special permission to get to these places. If this rift with Europe continues, are we going to be able to travel freely to Western Europe? Are these bans on books going to expand to the point where the administration tells you what you can read, where it tells you what music you can listen to? There are going to be real world consequences if this drift towards authoritarianism continues. And then the question is going to be, what are you going to do about it? You don't have to be an intellectual to say, I'm not going to put up with that. Americans, to their credit, and this works both ways, we may not be terribly intellectual people, and we may not read as much as we used to, but people enjoy their everyday freedoms. They enjoy being able to listen to the music that they like the most, even if that music has what the administration considers DEI messages or subversive messages. What if that kind of freedom becomes circumscribed in a significant way? How are people going to react to that? And I think our job is just to keep doing what we're doing, to send out the warnings and to interact with people who are getting the message and are willing to do something about it. The idea that you can put your head down and hide from all this is probably illusory. It may work for a while, but if these folks in the Trump administration get their way, they're not going to relinquish power. When Trump is finished, and let's face it, he's 78 years old. He still has a lot of energy, but he's not what he used to be, and who would be? They're 78. He's 78. He'll be 82 when he runs for re-election if he tries to do a third term. There'll be people replacing him, and they're not going to give up power. And they have a court system which is friendly to them. They've undermined voting rights. People have to be aware that the 2026 midterms are coming up. And I'm not sure that we're going to have free and fair midterm elections in this country. So that's something to keep your eye on. The other thing is to keep your eye on media, because the Trump administration doesn't like criticism. Yeah, to say the least. So it excluded the AP from the White House press, and it criticizes MSNBC all the time. And these are liberal institutions, far left or progressive institutions, which aren't that big, probably be overlooked for a while. But when they start going after these liberal media institutions, you'll know that something very, very dangerous and affecting everyday life is going on in the United States. The talk about yanking the FCC licenses from some of these organizations is accelerating at the same time that Trump is centralizing power in the presidency through this executive order. And it's all playing out. It's coming to a head quickly. And I think that there is some cause for optimism, because I think that they are running ahead of their support. And in many instances, they're not acting in a competent way. You have Musk cutting back certain agencies and laying off people, and then the next day saying, oh, we didn't really need to do that, and then scrambling to rehire them. So they're making all sorts of mistakes. And one of the ways they may be making a mistake that's going to affect people is in the area of vaccines. What is RFK Jr. doing with the flu vaccine? There's a very serious strain of flu out there this year. What if a new one comes up next year that's even worse? So we're going to have an available vaccine, which if you want to take it, it should be available to you. I don't know if we'll have that. What if there's some new and horrible disease like COVID that comes? Are we going to have a response as bad as the last one? Will it be worse than the last one? People's lives are going to be affected by this. And I don't know if Americans are prepared to just sit back and take it and say, let's wait 4 more years until he's out of it. Because even when Trump goes, this new system of governance will remain and continue, particularly this idea that we want to have a society run by technocrats like Elon Musk. And Elon may actually believe, I know him, I don't know much about him, but he may actually believe this is a better kind of world where we have people like myself, Musk, determining how efficiency is to be implemented in American life. And they may win out, and the rest of us will pay an awful price for that, both in material well-being, because the people at the top of the income pyramid are going to benefit from this, and the middle class is going to suffer. It's going to suffer in real material ways, and it's already happening. It's already underway. There are people who voted for Trump for lower prices. They're not seeing lower prices. They're seeing just the opposite. So my advice to people like you, keep doing what you're doing. Try to reach out to the rest of the population, what I call regular people. And I mean that in a good way. And encourage them to speak up and get involved.
So you said you don't know if this is what America voted for, but I would say clearly there's 2 Americas. One America is the kind of people that we watch and read and know and talk to. They're up in arms with what's going on. They're especially what happened with Zelensky yesterday. They're it's unbelievable. It's a life-changing thing. But then on the other hand, there's lots of people who like that shouting
like
them
it.
down. They love Corporal Vance shouting Zelensky down and hovering over him. So, but you know, the thing is, certainly if we waited 4 years or if we waited 2 years, some damage would be almost irreparable. You couldn't very well dismantle the Department of Education or fire all these people as they've done, or dismantle AID, and then some months down the road say, oh, no, the winds are blowing a different way, flip the light switch. All you people who used to work for AID in Colorado and Oklahoma, you come back to work. No, it won't work like that. And I think I don't think Trump. I think Trump is mostly worried about getting on camera and making his tea time. But the people behind him want to disable our democracy in fundamental ways. They do believe a certain kind of person ought to be running the country. People who look a lot more like me and a lot less like her and more like you. Um, so, you know, I hope the courts can step in a way that they didn't step in with Trump.
Well, it doesn't matter if they step in. According to the way that Trump is behaving, he wants to follow in the footsteps of Andrew Jackson. Let the courts, let them enforce it. They can't enforce jack.
So one of these theories, in particular the Dark Enlightenment theory, says that democracy has run its course. That's its main thesis. Democracy has run its course. It should be replaced by a technocracy that's run by these Silicon Valley intellectual software engineer types. And if democracy is just an abstract idea to the vast majority of people, then one form or another of this dark enlightenment idea will prevail and probably become the new normal in America. And my hope is that it won't just be an abstraction, because as democracy erodes, so do the everyday benefits that democracy brings. And it's those benefits that people will miss the most, including the erosion of their living standards.
Right.
And that, I think, will be the prime motivation for people to get involved. We saw a lot of that in the 2022 midterms. We saw a lot of it in response to the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision. And I think we're going to see a good deal of it in response to the way that Trump is governing the country. But you're right, Dick. Once you destroy something, it's hard to rebuild. I don't think it's impossible to rebuild, but it's going to take a long, long time to do that. So everything's up in the air right now. And it's up to people other than me and you to determine how this all gets resolved. It's up to Americans in general to decide this. If this is who we are, if this is what the majority of people want, this new technocracy, that's what we'll get.
Well, as always, it's been an enlightening half hour spending it with you, Bill. We so appreciate you sharing your knowledge, sharing your experience and your insights. I wish it could be on a happier note, but we do appreciate the time that you spend with us.
And it's always great to be with you, and I really appreciate what you and Dick are doing. And all I can say from my perspective is just keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Until
Sure.
next time, we'll see you again. All righty. Bye-bye.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below, and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm. which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.